All right, take us away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. This is the last Energy Code Board meeting of 2024. Nice work, everybody, for getting here and for getting so far in this code. We're going to jump in. If you couldn't tell from all of me and Adam's emails, there is a lot to cover today. And so we're going to try to get through as much as we can today. And hopefully get us in a really good place rolling into the new year, and get Adam the answers he needs to write the first draft code for everybody. So our objectives, we're going to actually, and just as a heads up to everybody, we had some communication with the folks who had proposals that we are going to talk about in this meeting. And some of those proposals shifted a little bit. One was withdrawn. And so just wanted to name that if you reviewed and did your homework and looked at the code proposals for residential, thank you. And some things have shifted. So we will cover that. But yeah, basically our objective today is get through as many proposals as we can. And the agenda is working through those proposals. Hopefully, depending on timing, I'd love to save, around 10 minutes at the end just to give you guys a timeline update and reminder for what's happening with the public comment period that we're going to roll into in January. And some of the asks that we, CEO and Lotus and our equity committee have for you all as far as making sure you're vetting the code with your networks. So we'll get to that at the end. And just a reminder, and obviously we'll talk a lot more about this at the end, that reviewing public comments as we roll into that public comment period will be incredibly critical to make sure that you all are up to speed on what folks is thinking about the draft code. So before we start, I hope some of you have had a chance to read the meeting minutes that I sent out on Friday. Sorry there was one out so late from our meeting last week. So we'll first try to approve the meeting minutes before we move on.
Move to approve those.
Thank you, Kevin. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Tim. All board members in favor of approving meeting minutes from meeting 21, please say aye.
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 And any board members opposed to approving meeting minutes for meeting 21, please say nay. Okie dokie. Meeting minutes are approved unanimously, and we'll get those posted on the website. So by way of quick update here, our final commercial draft board proposal that we had to discuss today was the proposal from Tim for C503. Through some email traffic with Tim between our last meetings, we have decided to withdraw this. Tim, I don't know if you wanted to share your quick rationale on why.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Kim. I reread the comments that were all made from the last board meeting, and I agree with a lot of almost all those comments, but it started getting pretty mucked up in terms of adding too much into this. So I decided to just pull this completely and then possibly revisit, because I think that really the fix for this is to potentially change the definition of substantial improvement. And I'm not going to bring that to the table, but it possibly bring that through public comment when the first draft is resolved. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that. And so, yeah, just to note that if this is something board members still want to pursue after the public comment period, there will definitely be time and space to do so. And you all could use that space in January when we have no meetings to help workshop what that change could be. So we're going to move on, and the rest of today will be focused on the residential draft. So just a heads up, we did, as you all know, receive so many residential draft proposals that I don't think we're going to have time to get through them all today, being totally honest with you. And so what we did is we split these two into different priority lists. The first batch of proposals are those that have not been discussed nor voted on in a public meeting with the board. And so those are the proposals we'd like to get through first. The second round of proposals is those that have already been discussed and voted on as a board in a public meeting, and those proposals are for reversals of previous board decisions. And so those will fall second in priority just because we've already had the time and space to talk about those, but we will try to get through as many as we can so we can respect all board members' proposals for this draft. Tim.
Yeah, thank you. I believe, and I'm not sure, we didn't make it through all the commercial proposals. I know there were two still more on my plate. Are we going to do those later today? One on the residential part was substantial improvement, and then the other one was the dark sky, which are on the commercial
Yes.
side.
Well, so Tim, both of those you had flagged on the residential side, so we've got those in today's agenda.
Nope, you are correct. I apologize. Thank you.
No, you're great. Okay. Thanks for checking us. I was like, uh-oh, am I missing proposals? I'm glad we're not. So this is just the overview. There are 12 proposals that we're really going to try to get through. And then I believe there's 8 that are in our second priority list. So like I said, we're just going to roll and see how many we can get done today. So Tim, we're going to start with you and your proposal for our 503, which was similar to the C503 change. And just let me know, I can advance the slide to show the language when you're ready.
Good deal. Thank you. Sorry about my confusion earlier, starting out on a Monday. Today's Tuesday. Never mind. So difference from the commercial that I just pulled to this section, I think it's easier to modify this particular section. And if you could pull up that proposed language again, please. And what I'm suggesting, at least just on the residential side, is to strike the reference to the definition that talks about based on the market value, and just specifically put in about alterations. So it doesn't have anything to do with additions or anything, just alterations. And we talked a little bit about gross floor area in the last meeting on the commercial side, and I think it would still apply to the residential side. So I think this would be a solution to not even having to refer to the substantial improvements. And then I think that this would capture being able to pull in work that is exceeding that 50% on the gross floor area. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. So this one is a proposal that didn't change at all between the residential proposal doc and now. So hopefully you all have had some time to consider it. I'll open the floor for 5 minutes for board questions, comments, thoughts. Andrew, go for it.
Could you please pull up the definition of substantial improvement as in the code briefly?
I would be happy to find it. Oops, and I am not on the right code. Let me jump over. Substantial improvement. Here we go. Can you see this? Can everyone see this? Okay.
Could you
And
also
then I'll
go back
flip
up the
back.
proposed or juxtaposed it to the proposed?
Let me see here if I can. And Andrew, this hopefully is in that document that the proposals that you looked at. Oh, God. Oops.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Uh-oh. Carolyn, while Andrew's reading that, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from the conversation we had last time, I certainly support shifting away from the assessed value. Again, I think as we talked about last time, but just to restate, depending on where you are and which type of structure you're referring to, you're either always going to hit it or you're never going to hit it if you use assessed value. And so I support moving to the gross floor area. I think when we were talking about commercial, we discussed, or at least I proposed, triggers beyond just the total floor area that would warrant the additional efficiency credits. And so I would just offer that I would like consistency between the commercial and residential sections with wherever we land. Between those two. So I think again, we didn't use just gross floor area in the Boulder code where we used the floor area, but also included like modification of mechanical systems and or fenestration changes. So just putting that out there. I'll support with wherever we want to go, but just want to make sure we're consistent.
Thanks, Carolyn. That's a helpful flag. Andrew?
Yes, getting back to this, in concept, many may agree with the concept of using 50% of the floor area. I think the intent of 50% of the value is there's a more clear threshold as to what the impact is. The way is proposed, I don't know what impact means, other than 50% of the gross floor area may be impacted. It may be $1. And I'm not trying to be facetious, $1 could trigger that or something that low, and I don't think that's the intent. So how does one reconcile 50% of the market value that itself may be not as clear as people want, but it's at least it's something that can be held up. That is the value of the project, 50% or more of the market or replacement value.
Thanks, Andrew. it sounds like Carolyn and Tim might have a response for that. So Carolyn, your hand popped up first, and then Tim, I'll go to you.
Yeah, and I was just commenting, and Hope made a comment in the chat about they are different types of construction and don't need to align. Again, I think the point here is this provision requires not just compliance of the project itself with the requirements under code. So but the requirement of additional efficiency credits, meaning that they have to make an improvement above and beyond just the scope of the project to the property. And I think that's the spirit of that requirement needs to be consistent between those. So that's why I made that comment. To Andrew's point, again, depending on the structure and market value, assessed value, you know, if we have 800 square foot homes in Boulder that have a market value over $1 million, you're never going to do a $500,000 project to that 800 square foot home other than scrape it and rebuild it, which would trigger new construction, right? So that's the issue. That's the dilemma that exists in our market, trying to use market value. So I'm very supportive of floor area, because if you're modifying more than 50% of the floor area of the structure, you're making a substantial improvement. You're truly altering what is there to begin with. And so I do think it's appropriate to require that above and beyond when you're making that kind of improvement. Again, acknowledging that some of the types of projects are things like just gutting a kitchen and maybe finishing the basement at the same time. And that's again why I've advocated for additional triggers beyond just the floor area, but that I just wanted to offer those clarities.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. So our 5 minutes for discussion and questions is up. Tim, I'm going to pass it back to you to see if you want to address Andrew's comment as well. And then I think I might move us on to a vote so we can keep us rolling today. But Tim, back to you.
I don't have anything to add. I think Carolyn covered things. I would not be in support of adding in, say, some of the other items such as she recommended we talked about last time with the commercial, say for fenestration or mechanical systems, because I think just the definition of alteration would cover that. And but that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, and you know, to the point of consistency, there will be time as we continue through for you all to continue to make changes here as you'd like to see. Andrew, I'll give you 20 seconds if you want to say a final thought here before we move to our vote.
I think this is something that needs further discussion, and I don't know how or when that may occur. I think the intent or concept might be something that holds some promise. I struggle with it currently as to any unintended consequence.
Okay. Thank you, guys. And I apologize, my computer hates when I go in and out of presenter mode, so hopefully if it starts to become an issue, we might just stay in editable mode all day so we can make sure we adapt these as needed. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We're going to move to our straw poll. So does the board want to change section R503.1.5 to require that the energy efficiency credits have to be in place based on a percentage of floor area versus substantial improvements? So option A is yes, in support of Tim's proposal. Option B is no, against Tim's proposal. And option C is to abstain.
Yeah, real quick question, Kim. Are you not proposing to change the definition of substantial improvement?
No.
No, that could come later. That's going to take a lot more work.
Yeah, the proposal is just as you saw it on the screen, Carolyn.
So it's using R202, is that correct for the definition of alteration?
Yes, if that's where the definition lives. Okay. I hate to draw a hard line, but I am going to move us to the vote because we have a lot to get through today. So board members in support of this proposal, knowing of course that as we move through public comment, there are times where we can continue to modify this as needed. If you would like to support this proposal and vote for option A, please raise your hand now. All right. My counter is gone. Looks like 11 hands for option A. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. If you would like to vote option B against this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 3 hands for option B.
I think Carolyn had a lingering hand on that one.
Yeah, sorry. 2. There were only 2 votes.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. And if any board members would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, we have 1 abstain, 2 noes, and 11 in support. So we will move forward with adopting this amendment into the code package. All right, so now we're going to roll into our R403 board proposals, and one of these we had a start at discussing at the last meeting. So hopefully those of you who missed the last meeting were able to read the notes and catch up. But both of these proposals come from Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, I will pass it to you to talk through the one that we discussed last time and changes that were made.
Yeah, hey, thanks everybody. Hope was really helpful in helping us ensure that the language here around sizing of the primary heat source aligned with language in the IRC and the mechanical code. So the language you see here added to the definition of primary heat source is just adding some clarification to those requirements. The specificities here around primary heat source is that the goal is in order for us to say, you know, the heat pumps are heating the home, is that it meets the heating requirements of the IRC without any supplementary space heating at an outdoor air temperature of 47 degrees. I chose 47 not totally arbitrarily, but because that's the temperature at which we get AHRI rated capacities. So it should be a fairly straightforward calc for designers or contractors to be able to assess. Then our supplementary heating would be that backup heat source that has to kick in whenever our primary heat source cannot meet those IRC requirements. FYI, I had to Google what this meant. Thank you again, Hope, for this reference, but what the code actually says around here is in the IRC, it says where the winter design temperature is below 60 degrees, every dwelling unit shall be provided with heating facilities capable of maintaining a room temperature of not less than 68 degrees at a point 3 feet above the floor and 2 feet from exterior walls in habitable rooms at the design temperature. So here we're saying the temperature in question is 47 degrees rather than, you know, a design temperature, but that our primary system would have to meet that temperature without any help from, say, baseboard heating or backup electric resistance heating or a fireplace or what have you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Hopefully that makes sense. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Questions, comments, thoughts from the board? Andrew, go for it.
Yes, Elizabeth, is an inference or one interpretation that when you say first heating source or primary heating source, that there can't be multiple heating source? Or is it just that there must always be a primary and a secondary or a supplemental?
That's a great point, Andrew. If there's wording we could put in here to say, yes, you could have two different, like a multi-zone type of system. Maybe there's a better way to say that. Yeah, because I'm not trying to say it has to be coming from one piece of equipment. It could absolutely be multiple pieces of equipment that make up the primary heat source.
Okay.
And Elizabeth, another question on this, is it maybe the intent, whether it's one or two or multiple, is it the intent that primary is intended to meet and this may trip over other topics, but the ACA manual J in of itself, is that what primary is intended? That primary is intended to satisfy the manual J?
I think no, I don't think so, because manual J will use a quote design temperature that's down
Okay.
something at like, I don't know, it varies by jurisdiction. Hope, can you comment on that? Is it like -13 or something, or 13 degrees? But
Manual
no,
J,
not
yeah, the temperatures will be done by manual J, either out of table 1A or 1B, or
So
the
use
jurisdiction already has it established.
yeah, but this would allow supplementary space heating to be sized or to be used for meeting manual J requirements. But that if the design temperature was only 47 degrees outside air temperature, that you wouldn't actually need that supplementary space heating. And if there's a better way to say that, we're not trying to preclude the use of supplementary.
I thought maybe there was an intent to preclude the use. So is it really the intent that if the design temperature itself is below 47,
Which it would be, of course.
that the primary heat, whatever that heat is, must be able to fully satisfy? But would that not be already a requirement?
Only at an outdoor air of 47 degrees. And the thinking there is that even if your heat pump needs backup electric heating, that pretty much any heat pump can be sized to meet loads at 47 degrees outdoor air temperature. I don't know that that would even be reflected in manual J calcs. I only know like about this much for manual J's, which is tiny. Do you see any issues with that from a compliance perspective?
My first reading back when this was first proposed, I was just a little bit stumped that the intent, I was a little stumped still by the intent, and the more I looked at it, without any supplementary space heating at and outsides.
I think the intent is to make sure that electric resistance is not the primary heat source. And meaning, let's say, if you have heat pumps serving perhaps a living room, but you need electric resistance in the bedroom in order to meet these IRC requirements, that would not be permitted.
It possibly does not have in the definition of primary heat source itself. Is that necessary? Is it really just the supplemental definition that's necessary?
I had difficulty defining supplementary without defining primary.
Is it not it's not necessarily, if the heat pump were to be triggered by backup, whether it be electric or gas, I just didn't want super cold climate or cold climate heat pumps to be the only thing that satisfies this, and I didn't see that as the intent.
No, that's not my intent either. This could be met by, say, a home with PTAX, as long as you have those in all spaces, as opposed to say just electric resistance baseboard in those bedrooms.
I saw Hope's comment just posted that, yeah, the manual J will use what's in Acker, it'll take it from ASHRAE, or it'll take it from DOE or whatever, if one's doing Energy Star, but it'll be put in the table by the jurisdiction. But I just was struggling, why is the requirement of primary heat source necessary to be defined if the intent is really the supplemental, but you're saying you struggled, and maybe I'm struggling with.
Yeah, the tricky part when this was first proposed is when we said electric resistant space heating is not permitted to be a primary source of heating. I didn't know what that meant. So how do we say it can't be a primary source of heating if we don't define what that means? So I was trying to set some parameters around that were easy to follow. Whether you agree with the concept of whether electric resistance is not permitted to be used as a primary source of heating is a different question, I guess.
Was that the?
Andrew, I guess I want to make sure that we have time to get to other board members' questions, if
Please
that's
go ahead.
okay. Thank you. Sorry, I hate to cut folks off, but Brad and Carolyn, you have had your hands up. So Brad, I'll go to you first. Oh, Brad, you're talking and the audio's not working.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there goes.
Okay. Always have to switch. So the way I interpret this and read this is that we're requiring heat pumps for electric space heating, but we're allowing a switchover temp at 47 degrees. So what that means is at 60 degrees, there is no heating load in our climate, but we're allowing a switchover temp at 47 degrees. So the heat pump is only working for 13 degrees. I don't think that was the intent. And I think setting the switchover temp or that supplementary space heating at an outdoor temp of 47 is gonna push people to install heat pumps that are nowhere near a cold climate heat pump, and then they're just going to install electric resistance backboard or backup for supplementary heat. I think we're going to run into the same thing that we ran into in some of the Marshall Fire rebuilds, where the majority of the year, because the majority of our heating occurs on the Front Range, especially occurs between 20 and 40 degrees. The majority of our heating will be satisfied by electric resistance or as supplementary heat, if we set that switchover temp at an outdoor temp at 47 degrees.
And I should say this isn't technically the switchover temp. This is just, I chose 47 just because that is, again, like the rated capacity. It's easier for reviewers to look at the rated capacity and see it. And, yes, we clearly meet this or we clearly don't. Heat pumps don't actually have switchover temps at 47 degrees. Everything's going to be at least 40 degrees or lower. 47 was just because that's a really easy number to find the rated capacity.
Agreed. Also, almost all heat pumps have rated capacity on the spec sheets at 47, 35, 17, and 5 degrees outdoor temp. So,
yeah, and if there's a better temp, I didn't want to get it quite so low that just having a heat pump on its own could, that perhaps a poorer performing heat pump would not meet this requirement, because I don't think that was the intent here. When we wrote it, we just said it literally just said install a heat pump in the largest space that is not used as a bedroom, and that didn't have any limitations to it. So I was trying to keep the intent of that original language by having this more defined by space rather than by operation. But we could certainly revisit that. I was just trying to maintain the original intent of the language.
Yeah. So I think the consideration. Oh, are we running out of time?
No. I just think it'd be helpful. I want to make sure we get to Carolyn's comment as well. But if you're thinking that if your comment is more of a comment against this, or if you're thinking about a change, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I'll say like in Fort Collins, because we want to really strongly encourage cold climate heat pumps. So the heat pump themselves are doing the majority of the work down to a specific temp before they could implement any kind of supplementary heat. We set supplementary heat or switchover temp at 15 degrees. Really, I should have done it at 17 because 17 degrees is within almost all spec sheets with a load or a capacity for almost all heat pump manufacturers. Like I mentioned, 47, 35, 17, and 5. So they'll list all those temperatures. But what it's saying is, like, as I read this allows people to switch over from the heat pump to an electric resistance or another source of heat at 47 degrees or lower, instead of the heat pump doing the majority of the work, let's say down to 17 degrees.
I think we should also keep in mind that there is that extra section R403.1.2, which is the controls on heat pump supplementary heat, right? And it says that the supplementary heat can't be used if the heat pump can meet the heating load. And so I think that kind of regardless of what temperature we adopt here, Brad, those control requirements still would apply. It would still prevent the supplementary heating system from being used until the point where the heat pump could no longer keep up.
And I want to keep this, the intent of this in mind is that this is prohibiting electric resistant space heating as the primary heat source. If you make that temperature from 47 degrees to something that is too low, that there is equipment that can't meet it, you're essentially prohibiting things like PTAX and VTAX. Whether that's your intent or not, that's what would happen. And I do have an issue with that because there are, affordable housing is a thing. We still need to keep those options open. I do not want to prohibit those systems.
So
Because
what
there
about
are
it?
there
Can
are
I
heat
dive
pumps that
in?
can't
Because
meet.
I
Yeah,
have a-
Carolyn, you've had
I
your
have a
hand up.
proposal on this.
Sorry, go ahead.
topic.
Thank you.
Because I appreciate, I think Andrew and Brad are naming the same thing I was, is this implies something that we're not intending. Why don't we just simplify it and say, electric resistance is not allowed for space heating, period. Exception, it can be used as supplemental space heating or heat pump in accordance to this, da, 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 da. And must be less than 2 kilowatts. Then we don't have to have all the definitions. We don't have to have the reference back to 47 degrees. We very clearly state you cannot use electric resistance for space heating other than, which is the exception language, where it is providing back a supplemental source for heat pumps.
Andrew?
I think there'd still need to be some exceptions for alterations or substantial improvements that if would this apply to just new construction? Because a home may already have it. And I don't think the intent is to make somebody rip it out if they already have it. And they have
I think this would only apply to new construction, and I believe the alterations language basically says you can't adopt a heating system that's less efficient than the one you already have. So if the one you already had was electric resistance and you do an alteration, in theory, you can keep that electric resistance heating source, Andrew. So I don't think this would ever require a home that's going up through a retrofit to remove resistance heating if they already have it as the baseline.
I'm also getting a little lost in this, because I don't have the IRC, or excuse me, the IECC language pulled up, but I guess in the theory, while I work and workshop this, Elizabeth, thoughts on Carolyn's?
Yeah, so what
Yeah.
I'm proposing is you just like stop it at that first sentence.
And
Cannot be provided for space heating, exception. Where electric resistance heating is used for a heat pump in accordance with section R3, that the total installed capacity shall be less than or no more than 2 kW, and then you have the additional exception for unless it's needed to satisfy the manual J.
you even need the 2 kilowatt at that point? Because you've already prohibited except for backup or supplemental.
I'd love to have the 2 kW limit because we keep seeing 10 kW systems going in, which are way overkill. So I think unless the manual J says it needs to be larger, I'd like to keep it limited to 2 kW.
But if the manual J permits it,
If the manual J says it needs to be higher, then you have to provide the manual J to show that it needs to be higher.
but that wouldn't be a manual J, would that be a manual S for the equipment selection?
I'll look to somebody else to answer that question, but I think that's the spirit of what I was proposing here.
I think we would still have issues with unintentionally limiting equipment. You know, like again, I'll go back to the PTAC and VTAC. Those are always going to be larger than 2 kilowatt electric supplementary. In fact, even if we did a fan coil or something, if anything that needs electric backup is going to be bigger than 2 kilowatt.
That's what I thought.
I guess what will be helpful for me and making sure we can advance this conversation, Elizabeth, if you like the concept of Carolyn's proposal and want to change the wording in the exception, I would love to hear what that is. Or if you're thinking that this is not still capturing your full intent and you want to go back to your original, that's
I'd be fine tabling this for the next 30 minutes while I go look at some things, and if I can come back in 30 minutes, would that work for everyone?
But Elizabeth, what the concept, my concept would be, you strike everything out between, you get rid of the 2 kilowatt because you would need larger than 2 kilowatt.
Yeah, let me, I agree. Let me go look at our 403.1.2 and those sorts of things, and we can come back to this in a few minutes. If I just don't want to take everybody's time for that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, I think we're gonna have to fly through a couple of these proposals. But Brad, do you want a final thought before we table and move on?
I think maybe one consideration on the 2 kilowatt then could be when the system is designed or specified at the design temperature. So that's assuming that the system will meet the load, it has the capacity to meet the load at the design temperature specified. So what that's saying is that the 2 kilowatt system is above whatever the system can't do as designed to the design temperature. Like at Fort Collins, our design temperature is 6 degrees. So we're designing a system based off of a load at 6 degrees. So we're saying still the system works down to 6 degrees. You can't exceed 2 kilowatts of electric resistance for a system that will still meet, it has the capacity to meet the load at 6 degrees. You don't want to go below that, and then you open yourself up to much larger kilowatt systems. But if we put in a specified design temperature, a jurisdiction specified design temperature, if required to satisfy the ACA manual J calculations at the specified design temperature.
Brad, I added this language you see on the screen into the chat. It might be helpful if you don't mind copying that and then adding in the sort of language you just proposed, and then send it back in the chat, and then Elizabeth can keep working on that. Kim, quick comment before we continue on.
I was just going to say, I want to just kind of bring this conversation back to the language that's in the 2024 IECC, which Elizabeth was kind of building on with her proposal, instead of completely removing that language, which may be seen as advancing the code or something along those lines, that, you know, she was simply trying to make it more clear. And I feel like most of the language in her proposal is good. It just may be that primary heat source, the last phrase, may need some nuances, but that's kind of what I'm getting out of the conversation, and my understanding. And primary heat source and supplementary space heating are very common terms in the mechanical design field. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Kim. So Elizabeth, I'll kind of let you workshop. Feel free to chat Brad and Kim or others on this. And I think you guys can direct message with each other if or just send it in the group chat, and then we can all kind of see your work. But Elizabeth, I hate to put you on the spot because I know you want to workshop, but we do have this next proposal was also yours. And then I think the one following was also yours as well, so we may have, once you get a break from your proposals, we can circle back and you can start working on that other one. So
No problem. Yeah, this one's a straightforward one. And it was just I didn't want anybody to get hung up on shall not exceed the capacity required to satisfy such calculations. Like when you do manual JCalc, you're going to get a very specific number like 2,678. And we don't, I think this is probably common sense. So maybe you guys will say, oh, no, we don't really need this. But to have your ability to round that up to the nearest standard capacity size. So perhaps the next nearest standard capacity size is 3,000 watts, not 2,678. So that's what that language is for. Now, if we change the other language, perhaps this is irrelevant, but that's what the intent was there. Thank you.
thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, Hope, jump in.
The only thing about this exception, it says rounded up to the nearest standard capacity size. Manual J and Manual S have very specific criteria about how equipment has to be sized. And this actually wouldn't work with those parameters because there's a lot of things that are brought into the equation, the elevation, the duration of the equipment, and so forth. So I don't know that this necessarily that we may want to have this here where we're having a conflict between what's being called out with the sizing standards.
Is there a better way to say that? So if manual J spits out 2,678, is that going to cause an issue if someone then specifies 3 kilowatts?
Well, part of it is by standard for heating, they are permitted to upsize their equipment up to 40% of what their load is to accommodate for all of the other variables that have to come into the equation. So
Okay.
in my opinion, we should leave it alone and allow the ACA standard to be the charging portion of this, which is why this has never made its way into the energy code or even onto the residential side, or the IRC, which is the guiding force of sizing of equipment.
Okay, thanks for that. Then if everybody thinks that sounds okay, I'm happy to withdraw this.
Okay. I'm seeing nods from the board. If anyone is, well, it's Elizabeth, it's your call. So I'm seeing nods from the board. Do you feel comfortable withdrawing this?
I see nods. Sounds like board is comfortable. I'm happy to withdraw. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay. So we will consider this proposal withdrawn, and we're going to move on to R405. We have a couple proposals in this section. The first one from Elizabeth, the second two from Andrew. So Elizabeth, we'll get to yours first, and then we'll jump over to Andrew.
Sure. Yeah. So the 2024 R405 added this sentence that I'm suggesting we strike. It's essentially saying that this particular methodology of compliance, R405, which is whole building modeling, is limited to dwelling units only, and that anything else like a corridor, for example, or a lobby or something like that would have to comply prescriptively. I think that makes sense when it's R406 because R406 does not deal with non-residential spaces, but R405 does. We've also added some good language in R405 that will continue to encourage electrification. So I think it makes sense for us to strike that sentence that was added in 2024, essentially reverting it back to 2021, and allow us to include non-residential spaces within the scope of R405. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, board comments, questions, thoughts on this proposal? Kevin?
Yeah, I just, this makes sense to me to support that.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay. I'm seeing no other hands. Give it 5 more seconds. If you're thinking and it's a half-baked thought and you want to share it, make sure you raise your hand in the next 10 seconds, or I'm going to move us to a poll. Okay, cool. So we'll move to the straw poll for this one. So does the board want to delete the language from section R 405.1 that limits the scope to just dwelling units? A vote yes is in support of this proposal, and option A is yes in support of this proposal. Option B is no, you're voting against this proposal, and option C is to abstain. So board members that would like to vote option A in support, please raise your hand. Awesome. Okay, 14 hands raised for option A. You guys can lower your hands.
I saw it go up to 15.
Oh, you did? Oh,
Yeah.
thank missed that last one. Okay, board members that would like to vote against against this proposal, option B, please raise your hand. Okay, I see no hands raised. Option C, abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, I have one abstain. You can lower your hand, thank you. So this proposal passes, 15 votes in support and 1 abstain. So we will make sure it gets added to the code draft. All righty. Thanks, Elizabeth, for that slew of proposals. We're going to bounce now to Andrew. And Andrew, I will pass it to you to share your proposal and let me know if you want me to navigate to the code language slide.
If you could please navigate.
And Andrew, I want to, I guess you had a couple proposals for R405. And this one in particular was to restore the 10 CFR reference throughout the table. So that's we broke it into several subcomponents.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
In reviewing this, the 10 CFR 4430.32, if I recall, is the federal efficiency standards. And didn't think that one should try and impose more efficient equipment than what is mandated at the federal level. Now, incentivizing them is one thing, but to try and bring in what I thought was the commercial, I don't think I myself or even many others fully understood the impact of this. And it was my intent that I didn't think it was busted the way it was with the reference.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So I'll take board member questions and comments, and for board recollection, basically the board had decided, and I think it was through a survey, to swap out the reference from 10 CFR, the minimum efficiency standards, to the commercial sections of the code that outlines those same standards. So Elizabeth, I see your hand. Go to you first.
Yeah, I'll try to add a little context on this because I think this was my suggestion here is in R405. Essentially, I was just trying to get the modeling protocol to align between residential and commercial because I think the intent is the same. So just to simplify things, it would not push things above federal minimum efficiencies. Actually, rather, it would be the opposite. And it would provide a consistent baseline such that, like Andrew, you would know if I specify these systems, I will always have this much savings relative to a baseline. Whereas if the federal minimum efficiencies would change, the systems that you knew were compliant day 1 may no longer be compliant in day 300 because the federal minimum efficiencies have changed. So what this does is it aligns it with the same practices that we would do with commercial, so that something that's compliant will always be compliant under this code from a performance standpoint. Hopefully that helps a bit.
A little bit, but when it gets down to even the guidelines, the FTC guidelines, what's the effect there? When one has stickers on the equipment, is there any impairment or any change?
No, it would not.
Then I think what you're saying is that the commercial standards, would that already comply if the 10 CFR reference was left?
The challenge with the 10 CFR references is that's dynamic, meaning that can change. And what I'm proposing is if we make it match the commercial provisions, those will not change.
But if it is dynamic in multiple markets, I'm still thinking from the operating in multiple markets. If the concern is that it may go down, that's a different concern. I think if it's to keep it consistent, those I haven't kept track of every time that reference may change.
Yeah, it's written in the commercial code that the issue here is not the mandatory efficiencies. That is what it is. Mandatory minimum, mandatory federal minimums. The issue here is defining the baseline. And I do not like when baselines change because that becomes difficult to consult based on timing. I would like the baseline to be predictable and consistent if we are making recommendations for our teams. 10 CFR, I don't know when that's going to change. So I don't like having baselines that move. Sorry, say again?
When was it last changed? Was it 2014?
Oh, no, it's constantly changing.
Yeah, because this will reference all of 10 CFR 430.32 references all the different equipment types. And so, Andrew, the DOE might increase the efficiency requirements for water heaters, but leave everything else the same. And then a month later, they might increase the efficiency for lighting and leave everything else the same as it was. And, so different product categories are going to change as DOE addresses the appliance standard efficiency requirements for each of those product types. And there's like 60 plus different product types that DOE regulates. And so, those standards will change. As Elizabeth described, it's like it is dynamic. I think the other thing to consider here is from setting a baseline perspective, Elizabeth, I guess one thing I hear what you're saying about not wanting dynamic baselines, but the other consideration is if you're designing a standard reference design based on equipment that you can't even use, does that make sense? Because the federal
that is just how energy modeling works.
Yeah.
Yes, it does make sense.
I hope you're on. Yeah, I'm used to this being referenced. I have it up in the background. So the AFUEs, the uniform energy factors. So you're saying they'd be locked in place and they wouldn't change? So what if the manufacturer changes? Is the DOE may go up or down?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that. Could you say that again?
No, first I was going to ask Hope if she had a comment on this, and then second, if the Fed reg changes, I haven't pulled up it here in the background looking at them. If it goes up or down, and a manufacturer modifies their equipment, is that going to have any ripple effect?
Hope, I'll let you go first.
What I will say is, in the past, when it came to the heating and cooling systems, they did have a combination going on about what their baseline would be, kind of depending on the type of equipment that was going in for which type of project. If it was a quote unquote commercial built out of the IBC, but following the residential side, sometimes they would be shifted over to the commercial side to follow those tables as a baseline, because that's what 403.7 stated, is that you may have to do that because of how you have designed your mechanical systems. But it also included where some of your if you were a single family home, it would be based off of 403.7 of the residential sections. I mean, I do understand where everybody's coming from on this, but I don't know that just stating the commercial tables would be appropriate. And I don't know if that answers your question, Andrew.
It does in part. So in a way, how do you keep both? If one wants to include, how do you not give up? Because I can't predict what an equipment manufacturer may do, and wouldn't even attempt to go down that road.
Yeah, so this wouldn't be for the manufacturing of the equipment. This would be the baseline for the type of equipment that you're choosing, as far as the parameters, whether, whether you're going to take a credit or a hit by the type of equipment you are including within your calculations. So I'm not really sure how to answer you on that, Andrew. I apologize.
Can they both coexist?
Meaning, when you mean coexist,
Coexist the 40332 reference and
the 10
CFR?
CFR?
Is there instance that
I think it's important to note here, we're only talking about a reference baseline. It's the thing you're comparing your design to. Your design does not have to be the reference baseline. In fact, you're trying to achieve a certain percentage or a certain amount of energy savings relative to that baseline. So like you as a builder, Andrew, you don't want that baseline to keep changing. You want it to be set and consistent, because if your baseline's always changing, how do you design to that, right? It's very difficult. And know that you're going to have a compliant home. Nothing else in the code changes in the way that 10 CFR does. Like when we talk about mandatory insulation levels, it's not like that's going to continue to, it doesn't go up and down. We're comparing to that. It's the same forever throughout the life of the code.
but if DOE were to lessen a baseline, that wouldn't be permissible.
I don't think that has ever happened.
I'm pretty sure federal law actually precludes them from doing that. It says there's no backsliding. Once they set new efficiency standards, they're not allowed to go back on that.
So I guess in the interest of time, I would like to move us
We
to a
wasted
vote.
extra money on stupid floors, but
Board members who so we'll move to the vote here. If folks would like to support or not, we can decide that in the vote. So does the board want to add back the reference back in the reference to 10 CFR over the commercial? So if you're in support of Andrew's proposal, your vote is option A, yes. If you are against Andrew's proposal, you're voting option B, no. And if you'd like to abstain, that's option C. So board members in support of this proposal, please raise your hand, option A. Okay, I see no hands. Oh, thanks guys. Sorry, that looks like 2 hands up for option A. Thank you. You can lower your hands. Board members who are against this proposal, option B, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 12 now hands for option B. Thank you guys. You can lower your hands. Board members who would like to vote abstain, please raise your hand. Kim, I think that was a lingering yes or no hand. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. I see 1 abstain.
Sorry.
You're good. Thanks. You can lower your hand. Okay. Thanks. Sorry to cut us off, team. Just there's a lot to get through, and we want to keep moving. So, Andrew, back to you for your next proposal. Again, we kind of broke out all of your 405 proposals, and this one is specific to the appliance standards that you had asked us to revert back. So back over to you.
Okay. So I kept the appliance efficiencies in compliance with the federal reference standard, and the entirety of the table, other than a few things that were permitting more flexibility, I had thought that the consensus committee had gotten this more correct than what the board had considered in the modifications.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Questions, comments from the board? Will, is that a lingering hand? Okay. All right. I'm going to talk out loud for a slow count of 10. Allow you all to consider this, make sure all thoughts that you're thinking?
Sorry, I'm still trying to find this in R405.
This was not originally an R405. This was the one that was part of the alignment of allowing you to take credit for appliances for modeling for non-HVAC and water heating appliances, so refrigeration
Oh, okay.
and other things.
Andrea, I don't know if you really want this. What's written in here actually lets you claim savings for any efficiencies that you put in here. I don't know that you really want to take that away.
So then, no, I may have needed the additional context when I was looking at the table in whole. The context could you pull up the current table with this language in it?
So the current table doesn't have this language in it, Andrew, I think is so the board originally wanted, Elizabeth had proposed to allow additional appliance efficiencies that are not covered under the water heating or the space heating equipment in table R405.2 to be allowed to be credited in the proposed design, because you're allowed to take credit for it in R408 if you do prescriptive. And so basically this was added into that table to allow crediting of those appliance efficiencies. This was not originally in the 2024 ICC at all.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. You brought
So
it up.
it's all new.
Bringing it back up, non-HVAC and water heating appliances shall comply with. So the inclusion of this, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, is that the inclusion of it seemed to impair an obligation that the appliance efficiencies that would have to comply. So what I think you're saying is that you're permitted to use it in the reference?
Essentially that the reference design would account for the minimum efficiency appliance that you could use. So like the minimum efficiency refrigerator that you could use. And the proposed design allows you to account for the savings you would get if you choose to use a higher efficiency refrigerator.
And that's if or when the software permits it, or if how does the jurisdiction do this? But probably I think what we're getting into is I'll just withdraw my proposed change.
I think this is where energy modelers would do this, not necessarily the jurisdiction. Elizabeth, I don't know if you can speak to that question, but
Correct. We would follow like an Energy Star modeling protocol, which defines like a baseline, standard compliant refrigerator versus say an upgraded refrigerator. So like Andrew, if you provided say an Energy Star refrigerator, you would get to take credit for those real energy savings. So we would follow a standard modeling protocol there, but it's not mandatory. It's just giving you credit for things that you would get credit for under R408.
So I'll withdraw this.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew and Elizabeth and Adam, for all chiming in there. So this proposal will be withdrawn. Okay, so moving us right along to our R408 proposals. We have 4 for R408 in total in this first round. Again, we'll get through as many as we can in the second round of proposals. So Andrew, the first 2 are from you, then we'll have 1 from Tim, and then our final one will be from Kim. So Andrew, I will pass it right back to you.
Okay, I'm scrolling down to 40822.
Cameron, I think this one might be helpful to have the language up on. There we go.
There we go. Yep.
Could you split your screen on this?
Yes, I would be happy to, and I apologize. It's going to get
Small.
small. And I will pull up the code language here for this half. We'll go down. Oh, Adam, so actually, was this in our code, or does this need
This was in there. Yeah, so this was in the original R408.
In the code draft, or should I pull up the 2024?
You could pull up either because the language didn't. I would keep what's on the screen, because basically the 2024 language, the only major change between that and this is that we removed all the options in that section that don't pertain to climate zones 4, 5, 6, or 7. So just essentially making it cleaner.
Got it.
But
Okay.
otherwise the language is the same as that section.
0.2.2. All right, here we
So
are.
as you can see, basically all we did was strike all the ones that apply to climate zone 0, 1, 2, and 3. because those could not be available in our climate anyway. So,
And Andrew, the proposal you had was on number 9. If you can see this on the slide, I realize it's quite small and I don't know how to make it bigger. And you had issue with the 70% heating capacity and wanted to change it to 25% per your proposal.
And I was trying to remember what I was thinking of here. So 9 is as it's currently stated for here. As it already exists, correct?
Yes.
nine is worded exactly the same as it was in the base code, except that we added, instead of furnaces, we added the or boiler wording because that was a proposal that the board wanted to consider boilers as part of that. But other than that, the language is as it was published in the 2024.
I'll just highlight that red so you can tell there was a change there, but
And that 90% is a pretty commonly available anyways, right?
And
not,
that's
not
what I was trying to look at when I was looking at this. So I'll withdraw this if it's no change.
okay.
Keep moving.
Awesome. That sounds just fine. Thanks, Andrew. Cool. So give it a moment. Okay. The next one is related to the evaporative cooling requirement. So, and this was, by recollection, we added this as an option in R408. So this language is not in the 2024, but was added by Adam. And then the red is your proposed change, Andrew. So back to you.
This one I looked at more extensively, that from design guidelines, they go off of cooling effectiveness or cooling efficiency, and 70% is a more common threshold.
So I
There-
just have a quick question for Andrew on that one. So I think that first bullet is talking about the ratio of the amount of the capacity of the amount of the cooling load that equipment would be serving. And I think your change is talking about the efficiency of the equipment, which I think are talking about two different things.
Yeah, so not less than 80% of the total.
Yeah, that probably should say space cooling load, not capacity. So we could potentially tweak that word, but
So to get credit for it, it would have to serve 80% of the cooling capacity. So 422, I'm going back to the changes here. So could you pull up the, this is
all new. So everything you see on the screen was new. Except for the red text that you had. So there's nothing else to compare it to.
Adam, you're correct. I was looking at more of the, you could say efficiency. So the 80%, where did my recollection of the 80%, where the 80% come? Is that just a value that?
Kevin, I don't know if you can speak to that. So I think the intent was that in order to achieve this credit, you essentially had, if you wanted to adopt evaporative cooling, it had to meet most of the cooling load of the building, but that there were potentially situations where you might want to, have another type of cooling system, like a window, AC unit or some other type of thing in a smaller situation, so that this would basically say that you don't have to have 100% of the cooling load covered because of those, other situations.
Yeah,
Kevin,
the peak, that's accurate. Those peak conditions when you're over 100 degrees for a couple of days in a row, it's, and it gets humid, then it's not enough. So we didn't want that that credit to be only available if it was 100%, but that 80 felt like the right number to cover the most common situations.
So Adam, I recall looking at this, and Kevin, that yes, I did address two different topics in here. I addressed the cooling efficiency and the capacity, and I still think that 70% was the appropriate threshold for capacity, not just efficiency. So including the 70% and striking the remainder where it says or where, I could withdraw the or where.
Okay, so you just want to revise your
Yeah.
proposal to be just changing 80 to 70.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. All right, so we will move forward with a vote just to change that 80% to a 70%. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, I didn't do other board comments or questions. Carolyn, you probably have thought. Jump in.
Yeah, I was wondering if somebody could summarize for me the argument over the 70 as compared to 80, like what makes 80 the wrong number and 70 the right number. I wasn't fully tracking the conversation. If somebody could summarize that, I would appreciate it.
This is Andrew. From my review, I attempted to look at capacity and efficiency in my review. I didn't think that 80% could be assured in a design capacity, in that 20% was not a sufficient buffer, in that a 30% was more readily achievable by the by any homeowner or by the design community.
Yeah, and my take, if I may respond to that, I think that the credit should mean something. Like, you do have to push a little bit to get the credit, so I'd advocate to keep the 80%.
Thanks, Andrew.
Or further, this is optional, so it's not like we're tying people to an onerous condition. If somebody chooses to do this, it's really just giving that credit to be able to do so.
Thank you both.
Yeah, Brad.
So do I understand it that we're also considering revising this from capacity to load? Just in the language?
Yeah,
Total
that's
HVAC
actually,
space should be load, yeah. Capacity
That's
doesn't make sense there.
yeah, no,
I
that was
agree
just the wrong word.
Agree with and support
Thanks.
that. Thank you.
And I don't necessarily want to tie that to Andrew's proposal, so I don't know if anyone had, maybe what I would ask is if anyone has a concern with changing that, and we could just kind of do a unanimous agreement, because I think just technically that was the wrong word to put there.
I'm okay with that change. I think that's accurate.
Okay, I was gonna say, I think we could just update that correctly, because I don't want to tie that to Andrew's proposal.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Any final thoughts, comments, questions before we move to a vote? Okay, not seeing any. I'm going to keep us out of slideshow mode for just a second more. So I'm going to adjust this, want to reduce the cooling capacity requirement from 80% to 70%. And I will remove the second part of this question, which was, Andrew, the second part of your proposal, which you withdrew. So board members voting yes, A, are in support of changing the number from 80% to 70%. A vote B is against this proposal. You are not supportive of that change, and a vote for C is abstain. Adam?
Just wanted to be clear too that also would say cooling load, not capacity in the question. Just so no one is confused about what we're talking about here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's move ahead with the vote. Board members in support of this proposal, reducing the requirement from 80% to 70%. Please raise your hand. Okay, I see 2 votes in support. You guys can lower your hands. Thank you. Board members that would not like to support this proposal and this change, please raise your hand. All right, I see 11 hands for no. Thank you, guys. Lower your hands. And then finally, if any board members would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, I have 2 abstains. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. So this does not pass, and we will keep the language as written in the residential draft. Okay, thanks, Andrew, for those couple proposals. I'm going to move us on to Tim. And sorry, Tim, for the delay. There it is. And oh, actually, I'm going to come out of this because I was going to pull up the language from the IGCC. So Tim, I'll let you talk while I.
Good deal. Yeah, thanks, Kim. I originally was going to propose, or it was on the table in the other documentation, to delete this new section, reference to this new section, or just dark sky exterior lighting, primarily because it's really not even a standard, really unenforceable for a jurisdiction. But after that, I believe Kim might have presented something to Adam. I think that's where this might have come from. That there is a section in the IGCC, which a lot of departments have not adopted, mine included, but I'm familiar with it. So I did pull this up specifically, and Kim's got that one particular section which really deals with the concept of dark sky. And as I read through that, I'm a proponent of that concept. I think it's a good thing. I know some communities have instituted various levels of this, not only in Colorado, but across the country. So my proposal would be to just reference this particular section out of the 2024, which is, as you've seen, I know there's a lot to read through there, but it's an enforceable code language, which is really the critical part. It gets to the intent, but it's also very critical. Yeah, Hope. I didn't even look at the other code book, but this IGCC is also a good. So is there comparable language in that other book, or is it different or better? So the answer to your question, Hope, in the chat question, no, I didn't, because I'm just not aware of that code or familiar with it.
It's the National Green Building Standard. The only reason I ask is because the IGCC is specific to only commercial projects. So that was why, because it's designed, all of it is designed thinking commercially and not how residentially it would be affected.
But conceptually, this language looks like it would be easily enforced to comply with and enforceable for residential, which include 3-story multifamily. Correct? Maybe?
Hope, I think that was a question back to you, but
Sorry.
I don't. I'm sorry, but even on 3 stories or less, don't qualify in the IGCC. They're still considered residential here. It doesn't kick in until 4 stories.
Well, so I guess the question is, could we adopt the language here?
Oh, yeah, I'm just
not necessarily
saying,
limited to the, yeah. So
I'm
Tim,
just
I think
saying that when they developed it, it was developed for commercial applications, not necessarily to be utilized in a residential application. That was all I was bringing up.
Okay. No, understood. Thank you for that clarification. I did not, I know that code. I haven't opened it up. I don't, if they have a section that's very similar, I know we don't have the time to pull that back up and review it, but I think I'd like to propose going forward with this, and then in the public comment process for the first draft, if that's better language and more specific for residential and small. But this looks to me like it could work on the residential side of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
So Tim, what I'm going to propose is, in agreement, just aligning or clarifying what I will probably do with this language if the board were to adopt it, is actually take it and put it in our code as opposed to referencing the IGCC, just because, to Hope's point, if you just reference the IGCC doesn't apply to the building types we're talking about. And so I will probably just if the board approves this, I would take this language out instead of just
okay. No, that would be very good. I would agree with that, to get that in the body of the code. And then there would be no question, as Hope brought up. So I would agree with that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Adam. Okay, board questions, comments, thoughts. I see there's a couple, or Carolyn has dropped some thoughts in the chat, as well as Kevin. Elizabeth.
Sorry, I'm only moderately familiar with these ratings, but I know that they were originally written for, more, I don't know, urban or suburban and not rural type of applications. And if we were to implement this sort of thing, we do have to consider more rural types of development. Like I live on a farm, my house would not comply with this, and I would be kind of ticked off if they had to, because I do need floodlights, honestly, for safety and stuff like that. So We
This is,
just would need to consider that.
This is an option for a credit in R408. This is not required.
Oh, I see. Okay, I may have misunderstood.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
if you were to comply with these requirements, you could get a credit under R408, but if you don't comply, then you don't have to. You just wouldn't get the credit under R408.
I apologize. I misunderstood. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Okay. Last call, questions, comments, thoughts? Carolyn.
David Bannis question. Does have to be answered today. Will jurisdictions have the option to remove this as a credit where they have dark skies requirements already through code?
I think we can answer that pretty clearly, Carolyn, and that given that it's an option, the only requirements in R408 are how many points you have to achieve. Everything else is an option of how you get there. And so if a jurisdiction were to remove that as an option, then I don't think that's strengthening or weakening the code. That's just changing what options you have.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Alternatively,
I think that's right. Yes.
yeah, sorry, David, go for it.
Go ahead, Kim. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, alternatively, they could update this to be the more stringent requirements that they have in place for dark sky as the optional credit. In the local jurisdiction could make it more.
I want to give them credit for complying with code.
Right. Just
Sure. Right. They can make that they can make that what they do to get the credit.
Kim.
I think I might have been the person who originally brought forth this idea for this item to be points, because we do have quite a few dark sky communities in my region, which is very rural. I support the efforts by Tim to make it much more clear. And I think it would be helpful if in the adoption notes or suggestions for jurisdictions, just to make them aware that if they have a dark sky criteria in place as mandatory, that they consider including those mandatory requirements in the code and removing the points. Just as recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. That's really helpful. Okay. Alrighty, well, I think I'm going to move us to our straw poll here. So does the board want to revise section R408.2.12? Sorry. Screen lag, to refer to the light pollution reduction credit in the IGCC. So option A is a vote yes in support, option B is a vote no against, and option C is abstain. All right, board members in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, thanks everyone. I see 14 hands for option A. Can lower your hands. If any board members would like to vote against this proposal, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands for option B. Any board members who would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no votes for option C, this change passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone.
Question, Kim, can that apply to commercial as well? We were approving it under R408.
We were just approving, this was just a vote for adding the language into R408. If there's interest from the board in bringing it into the commercial side, I would ask that you all review the language, think about it, and maybe bring that in post-public comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Wonderful. And I think this is our last of our first priority proposals for Kim. And then I'm going to just note that we'll circle back, Elizabeth, to the 403 proposal that we tabled before we move on to our final proposals. And we'll just see how far we can get again. So Kim, over to you for this proposal.
Yeah, and I think I brought this concept forward for just trying to introduce controls into exterior heating systems to ensure that they're not operating all summer long or in the winter when there's no moisture to be melted. I've done some attempts at wordsmithing to try to make it more clear. And that's essentially the goal, is just to try to make sure that these systems don't operate when they shouldn't. I may not have gotten the temperature exactly right for the item number 2, but that's my intent here. So I think initially we just talked about snow melt and de-icing got in there, but not heat tape. So just wanted to add that one.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. And Zach, thanks for being here. I see you're jumping on a plane. We'll talk to you soon. Board comments, questions, thoughts. Jess, we'll go to you first. Oh, you're muted.
I had to lower my hand and hit the unmute button. Thanks, Kim. Definitely heat tape is a large topic of conversation here as well. And I just have a few questions just based on the questions we've been asking ourselves with our own building departments, which is a lot of times for new construction, they won't necessarily have the heat tape installed yet. So if they're installing at a later date, how do we ensure that the controls are installed with the heat tape? So that's just a challenge we have run into. And then another suggestion here is, would we want to specify, I mean, again, understanding that enforceability once you CO the building, is, also with timers. August REG Engineering did a study on heat tape controls and found that, well, and I think this is best practice from Holy Cross Energy too. I think it's like running your heat tape from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., but not running it overnight. And so I think that's another important thing to include if we're looking at moisture control as well.
Thanks, Jess. And I'll just note Hope's comment in the chat there. We can't ensure the what ifs, given the line of, I think, authority that this code has in the where the COs get handed out. Kim, I don't know if you had any other thoughts or anyone else has a question, comment to share.
I'm going to say that exterior heating systems are typically accounted for in jurisdictions that adopt REMP programs, which are exterior mitigation, renewable energy, exterior mitigation programs. But that addresses the energy use that's estimated that those systems will use. It doesn't address the actual controls that should be installed with those systems. And a lot of times the installers are simply worried about having a callback or an insurance issue. And so I wanted to try not to get too involved in the specifics of a given situation, such as just suggesting, and I've heard conflicting opinions as to when it's best to operate a heat tip system or a snowmelt system, et cetera. I think there's probably one answer that's correct out there, but there are conflicts with that opinion or the evidence. So I was just trying to get out of the regulatory as far as too much detail and more just let's make sure there are at least systems there that have the potential to be properly controlled. And obviously if a system gets installed after CO, I think that happens a lot with a lot of things. That's beyond our control. There is new technology out there also that can operate both these systems based on camera technology. That goes beyond the ability to kind of control that in our code here. But there are easy, inexpensive ways to make systems use a whole lot less energy than even this regulation would help to ensure. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thanks, Kim. We'll go to Andrew and then we'll go to Kate.
Hi, Andrew Harris. I'm dealt with this a little bit, but I'm not aware of sufficient controls that this already seemed to be reasonably well regulated in the inclusion of additional metrics. It seemed to be a little more challenging than I thought that may be feasible or might be on the market, because I'm not aware of any, personally not aware of any home, including up in the mountains, that would satisfy this currently.
I'll say that all of the systems that are installed in Telluride do follow a checklist that goes along with our REMP program. They use the checklist, not all the jurisdictions do, that simply mandates that these systems have controls that are relevant to the temperature and the moisture available or present. So it's a simple checkbox, and that was the intent of this original proposal.
Does it not satisfy that as drafted?
It didn't include heat tape. And the draft included temperatures, which were not quite what I was intending with the original proposal of below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So the draft was requiring that systems for snow melts do not operate if the temperature's below 20 degrees. And I don't think that was the intent of anybody.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Andrew. Brad?
Something to consider. We had a real life scenario in Fort Collins where we had a podium style multifamily building. We had a floor system below, and they applied heat tape to the plumbing that ran through that, even though it was insulated and an air barrier around it. And the heat tape was set at an outdoor temp of 32 degrees. It was set to kick on at an outdoor temp of 32 degrees outdoors, not at a temperature specific to that floor cavity. So what we found was that this building experienced really high utility bills most of the winter because that heat tape was kicking on, even though within that floor cavity, the temperature might have been 50 degrees. And I'm wondering if the inclusion of heat tape here might allow for something like that. Just something to consider.
Kim, if you have a thought and response, feel free to share it. Thanks, Brad.
I guess one idea would be to split snow melt systems and heat tape. I'm not quite sure where de-icing would fall, but we could certainly split the two to be two separate items with similar control language.
And I think the one thing I want to remind everybody on again is that this is an optional credit. And so thinking about the optionality of this, how many points you could earn if you're trying to address exterior heat as a whole, and you separate this out, so now that a building could take advantage of twice as many points for doing the thing that they were already going to do, you know, just thinking about that in the context of this is an optional credit, not required by base code.
Thank you, Kim.
Ron?
I think it does make sense to separate out the heat tape and the snow melt de-icing stuff. I think they're really different in terms of how they function, and they're really different in terms of the loads. And I think they probably have slightly different solutions.
And the length, if we split it out, could it be that they could obtain points for one or the other, but not both? Or that if they have both systems, they have to meet both? Something along those lines, so we're not adding numbers of points.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about snow melt systems, the amount of energy that we've seen occasionally being used for snow melt systems is, you know, it's greater than some of the houses that the snow melt systems serve. And heat tape, while it uses a lot of energy, it never approximates that kind of a load. So I want to make sure we get it right for the snow melt stuff. And I think whether or not heat tape has a solution, I'm not even sure, because of these variable issues about, you know, you're focused on, you know, maintaining temperature for a specific pipe in a specific circumstance. Usually it's a circumstance that you are trying to sort of avoid anyway. So whether or not you can find a way to write up the heat tape so that it makes sense, I'm not sure. We know that the snow melt system needs to be addressed, and I think the language was working pretty well for that.
Thanks, Ron. So I want to name that we have about 25 minutes left and one more priority proposal to get through. So Kim, I'm not sure how you're feeling. We could move forward with the vote on this. We could table it and come back after public comment, or I could try some very quick inline edits.
The table, I can try to wordsmith, or at least if we remove the heat tape language, I think we still need to change the temperature that was in the proposal for number 2. So I think we can continue to wordsmith outside of the meeting and bring it back.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Kim. So we will table this proposal, and Kim will expect to see you back with some different language after public comment. Okay, so I am now going to go back here to our 403. Close your eyes if you don't like scrolling. I apologize. And I'm gonna go back into edit mode. And Elizabeth, I saw you drop some language in chat. So I'm gonna pull it, turn it back to you, and while I edit and add this language onto a slide for us to consider.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if folks can see what I put in the chat. You might have to scroll up just a titch. Trying to simplify this based on the board suggestions, which I think is a great idea. There we go. So this takes Carolyn's suggestion and basically says, can't use it for space heating. Can't use electric resistance for space heating unless you're using it as supplementary heating as defined by our heat pump backup. But we also have to consider spaces that are likely still to need electric resistance heating for freeze protection. So the old language with that 47 degrees also precluded the need for spaces that are typically heated to 50 degrees, like stairwells. So think about the multifamily applications. Stairwells that don't have cooling, they are typically heated to 40 or 50 degrees for freeze protection of, fire protection, sprinklers, that kind of thing. Other freeze protection for mechanical rooms, water entry rooms. Usually those are either little electric unit heaters or little electric baseboards. They really are spaces that are only heated to 50 degrees. So my suggestion here with exception number 2 is to allow a little bit of electric resistance heating that would be used for multifamily applications.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thoughts?
Yeah. Board members jump in with thoughts. I can make it bigger so you guys can see it a little bit better. Carolyn, start with you.
Yeah, I think to the earlier conversation, I'd still like to see some constraint on the electric resistance as backup for the heat pump or the supplementary. So going back, whether it's the manual S or manual J, calculation, or at least, bounding it into what's demonstrated through an analysis or a max limit. So one or the other. I'm not tied to either one of those, but I don't want it to be a free-for-all.
Thank you, Carolyn. And if you could think about how that language would fit into where that would fit
So
in.
back to the original language and the exception for that heat pump.
Where's the original?
Shall be permitted to exceed 2 kilowatts if required to satisfy the calculation, but not required. That last part of the sentence there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, I'm just going to move it onto this slide and we can look at, oh God, that's very small. We can look at it all together.
It would just go with number 1.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
My struggle with that is that any kind of backup electric resistance heating that's integrated to a heat pump is always going to exceed 2 kilowatts. So it seems like that, I'm not sure if it's either not enforceable or will never be applicable. But even like the tiniest little, PTACs that are only 1 ton are going to have larger, they're going to have, 4 kilowatts of backup electric resistance heat.
Yeah, I mean, you're still thinking about multifamily, and I'm still in the space of single family residential. And so I think that the intent here is to make sure we're not doing heat strips that are oversized within the kind of the standard residential heat pump install.
And I'll also, if we tie things to manual J, multifamily, they don't typically do manual Js. So I would use caution in tying ourselves to that. That's not typical for multifamily type of applications.
So what calculation would say that PTAC is the appropriate backup for a heat pump?
It's just what you can purchase. I mean, you can't purchase a PTAC with only 2 kilowatts of electric backup. So even the smallest capacity is going to have a 5 kilowatt strip. That's just what there is. That's all there is. They're they're just sort of standard sizes.
So what calculation would say you need the PTAC as the backup?
The PTAC would be your system. It's not the backup. It's a heat pump with electric resistance backup. Now the electric resistance backup still has to follow the requirements of R 403.1.2. So it's, not engaged below a certain temperature. But
it's integrated into the unit, correct?
It's integrated into the unit, yes.
So do we just want to add the word separate? Supplemental?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow that.
You would exempt supplemental heating systems that are within a single packaged unit?
Yeah.
I'm going to let you guys sit with that idea for a moment because I have two other hands, and I'm going to go Hope and then I'm going to go Andrew.
I was just going to offer the insight. So when we're talking commercial, it is not manual J. Elizabeth is correct. They do have the option if they're going to do individual units to utilize manual J. Otherwise, what they're going to utilize is heating and cooling load calculations that are done under different standards. So she is absolutely correct. You probably don't want to do that. And just to make the comment about number 2, probably want to be very cautious because there are requirements out of other codes that specify ensuring freeze protection. So we don't want to mess with anything that has to deal with freeze protection, because if it's a choice between the energy code and ensuring that we don't have pipes bursting in certain locations, pipe not bursting outweighs the energy code, plus how efficient is insulation in a wall if it's all wet and frozen. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
Thank you, Hope. Andrew?
Yes, the first or primary concern, is it already not satisfied by the initial overt statement that electric resistance cannot be used for space heating? Number 1. Number 2, I agree with Elizabeth. Unless one is intending to absolutely force in all instances cold climate heat pumps, I don't think this is achievable, period. That there will be electric resistance heat backup. So why not exempt out all backup or supplemental heat when used in conjunction with heat pumps? But is it even necessary to do that if it can't be used for space heating? Is there a concern that resistance heating could be used independent of a heat pump? And then if there is, the only thing I can think of, would it be tied with an evaporative cooler? That if one went that route, one would not have, because there'd be no evaporative coolant, I don't think, exists in manual J, at least not in my last review. I'm still unsure how is not if it's made more overt out of the top of the exception for the heat pump should be blanket in every instance. So what's left? That's of concern.
Thanks, Andrew.
So I'll use this example. I throw in a non-cold climate centrally ducted system that barely performs, and I put baseboard electric resistance in every room other than the main living space. Is that supplementary or not? I mean, I think it's too ambiguous in that configuration.
Is that not prohibited up top, resistance?
I'm going to argue that the heat pumps the primary, but I've got electric resistant space heaters because the heat pump's inadequate to fully heat those other spaces.
I think R403.1.2 helps you there because there's thermostat settings around that, around the capacity of the heat pump compressor. If for us to preclude baseboards in other spaces, we kind of have to go back to the heat pump, the original language where we said the heat pump has to meet the loads at a certain outdoor air, like the full load of the home at a certain outdoor air temperature. That was sort of the goal behind the primary.
Remind me, I thought that the original language, so this R403.1.2, the 2 kW, the ACCA manual J calculation is part of the 2024 ICC as the base code.
No, manual J is not mentioned in the base code. The
So where
2.0
did the
kilowatts.
manual J, where did the black text come from on
The-
this?
Manual
So
J is part of the energy code. It's duplicative of the IRC and in the IECC.
I think the question was around the original wording of our 403.7.1, which includes the language around the 2.0 kilowatts, but not the language around manual
Yeah,
J's.
the original wording ended at bedroom. Everything else was something that the board added because the board was, there was a proposal around prohibiting it as a primary heating source. And then there was obviously like, well, if it's not a primary heating source, but we allow it as a supplementary, which I think is that was the impetus behind Elizabeth's entire proposal, was that like that was not clear enough, right?
Yeah, I think we're trying to get to the same goal, though. I think we're trying to do the same thing. I do want to make sure we can use electric resistance for freeze protection. I think Andrew brings up a good point about what if you don't have any DX? Are we prohibiting electric resistance in spaces without mechanical cooling or without DX cooling? I think that's a good point. I'm struggling a bit with the wording here, but I think we're trying to get to the same place.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that there was a limit in the original text. I'm uncomfortable having no limit whatsoever on our definition of supplemental to a heat pump.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know what I realized? I think I inadvertently deleted out of here is that R403.7.1, I neglected to include the first words, which were detached 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses. And that's probably an important consideration. That helps you with what your goal is there, I think. And then it's the capacity of all electric resistant space heating serving the dwelling unit. So I think if we include serving the dwelling unit in that language, we can also get rid of, or we can be more careful about freeze protection because we don't have as many of those considerations. You don't have water entry rooms for single family and townhomes, that kind of thing.
So Elizabeth, for this proposal, would you like me to make that change for the language that the folks are seeing on the slide, the one you just mentioned?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, that takes away some of the larger considerations.
Can you direct me on explicitly where that language was supposed to be added?
Yeah, I'll just put let me see if I can copy this original wording in here. Sorry, I'm a visual person. If it will let me, oh, I can't post a picture. Never mind. That didn't work.
Okay, I put the wording on the slide in the chat for you, Elizabeth. I'm going to move us to a vote in probably a minute, so we have enough time to wrap up. But Tim and Tom would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. So we'll go Tim and then we'll go Tom.
Yeah, thank you. The comment that we don't have water entry rooms on townhomes, I've got 3 or 4 different townhome projects that we've been building, and they have a single water entry, and they bring it into an entry room without doing all separate meters. So we do have that situation.
That's a good point. With that, are those considered within the dwelling units, Tim,
No,
or with that?
It's a closet underneath at the end of one of the end units, and that's where they bring it in and put the backflow preventer. We require water meters to be outside in Broomfield, but that's where the shutoffs and the reduced pressure backflow preventer, and then it's needs to be heated, but it's not being conditioned from the space that's next to it. So that's how we get those, and it saves builders money, so they don't have to do 5, 6, 7 different taps and separate meters. So we do have that condition.
Thanks, Tim. Tom, we'll go to you.
A second exception is the 0.1 watt per square foot. That doesn't seem like it's enough to help with freeze protection. So that's supposed to be 1, because otherwise it's 100 watts and 1,000 square feet.
That's a good question.
Yes, I'm sorry. You're correct. That's what I get for typing too fast. Apologies.
And Elizabeth, I guess the only question I would ask you on that is I would follow up based on what Hope said about if it takes more than that to ensure freeze protection in the other codes anyway, is there a point in even having a limit? Like if the IRC or the IFC would say you have to have one, like it takes 1.5 watts,
Good point.
then that's going to supersede this anyway. So to some degree, it seems like it should just say electric resistance heating used for freeze protection or in spaces.
Yeah,
just
good point. I
generally,
agree.
because that will be required in the other codes anyway.
Yep, I agree.
So Kim, I think you could just get rid of the up to 1 watt per square foot of.
And then the second one would be a question around in spaces where cooling is not provided. That would be in your instances where you're using evaporative cooling, perhaps. And we should probably say where DX cooling is not provided, because then you don't have a heat pump compressor built in, and it would be something extra. And that's a question for the board. Discuss.
Okay, so we have 7 minutes left, Elizabeth. So I think what I want to understand from you is, are you interested in voting on this as is? Right now, I don't think we have time for any more changes. Just in sort of fairness of trying to move us through and get us to the wrap up slides I need to get through with you all. So we can vote here, or we can decide to table this. We can continue to workshop this with Hope or others offline and resubmit it after public comment. Do you have a preference on which way you're
Yeah, I'd prefer not to rush through this and let everybody sit on this and get Carolyn's concerns addressed. So if you don't mind, if we table this, we can deal with it offline. I'm sorry, everyone.
No, that's okay.
It's harder than I thought.
The intent is good in there, and there's lots of good, I think, comments and discussion from the board today that can help dial in the language. So we'll move ahead with tabling the proposal for R403, and I'm going to move us on to our wrap-up slides. Oh wait, oh my God, I'm sorry. We actually have a proposal for R502 that we are not going to get to. So Adam, is that okay? I mean, we don't have time for this final couple proposals here on 502.
I mean, if we don't have time, we don't have time. So.
Okay. So Kim and Andrew, apologies. The 502 proposals, if we can resubmit those after public comment for the board to consider, that would be wonderful. And then just to note that Andrew had a number of you had a number of proposals to kind of change or reverse things that the board had already decided and voted on, and we are not going to have time to get to any of those today either. So just please keep those in mind and track those as you all are submitting your public comment board proposals. Kim?
Can those just be automatically conveyed forward, or do we have to do further to make sure we resubmit them?
Andrew, or sorry, Adam.
We can, if you're comfortable with leaving the proposal as is, Kim, then we can just carry it forward and recognize we didn't get to it yet.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss it in my to-do list. Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Okay, awesome. So Kim and Andrew, your proposals we will roll into the next the public proposals that we discuss after the first public comment period. So I'm going to roll us down to, oh my goodness, so many slides. Our next steps, and I'm going to talk quickly through these. So apologies, but just want to make sure I get all of this in before we sign off for the new year. So a couple timeline and key dates for you all to keep track of. The final full draft of the code will be published on January 6th. Hope and her team are going to review the code draft before it gets released to the public, and they may result in a few tweaks and changes. So it's encouraged that all of the board, once that full code is released, are taking the time to read, review it, understand it. The electric solar and EV readiness provisions are going to be integrated into the draft as we would see them in the final version of this code, so you all can react to where those are placed and how they fall in the code. The public comment period is January 6th through February 7th, and then our first meeting back together as a board is February 11th. This is going to be a live public comment meeting. We will not probably have time in this meeting to discuss any proposals. We will have the three meetings following this one to discuss and vote on proposals for the first draft. All of your proposals are due to us following that public comment meeting, Tuesday, February 18th. We'll remind you of that deadline many, many times, but just for you all to kind of keep track of. And that's to make sure that anything that comes out of the public comment meeting, you all have a chance to capture and throw into your code proposals. So just a couple of reminders during the public comment period. CEO is going to be meeting with ICC chapters and industry groups to review and vet the code. You all's responsibility during this month off of meetings is to please review the code for residential and commercial in full, share the code with your networks, solicit input, check the public comment forms and the code proposal forms for new input, and then compile your proposals for Lotus throughout that public comment period. I think it'll be a lot easier for you all to review and write your comments and notes as you go through rather than to read it and then come back and do all your proposals. So do whatever works best for you, but please, please, please take the time in this break from meetings to make sure you're reviewing the code. And for those, Kim and Andrew, who made comments that we didn't get to today, please revisit those and make sure you still agree with them before we bring them back to the board. And then I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts from the equity committee. So as you all know, or I think know, Allie and I have been running an equity committee and we've completed 3 meetings with a group of folks from across the state. And a couple of ideas came out of our last meeting. They're compiling some recommendations for CEO and this sort of adoption and implementation process. But just these are a couple of ideas from the equity committee I wanted to pass on to you all before we jump into that public comment period. So if you all are hosting public events or attending public events where the code is being reviewed, or CEO, you all are hosting those events, to make sure a board member is present that can help explain the context of decisions that have been made. If, just as sort of generally, if as we move through and look at public comments or receive public comments, to have technical experts from the board reply to some of those to lend credibility to the decisions, again, made by the board in agreeing or dismissing those public comments. Focus on some targeted outreach, students at universities or technical colleges to start engaging with different audiences and collecting diverse perspectives and input. For the board and CEO to host a workshop with affordable housing community. And then as you're able, targeted workshops with minority contracting organizations. So these are just ideas that I thought were worthwhile to pass along. If you have any ideas on how you can advance any of these through the public comment period or through the end of this code development process, I think that could be really helpful. So that's all I've got. I know it's one. So if folks have questions and want to hang on, we're happy to stick around. Again, our next meeting is February 11th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's a live public comment meeting. If you have constituents who are interested in giving a live public comment, please, please, please make sure to send them the link to register in advance. And we'll send you the notes to review before we vote. So.
Yeah, I'm going to interject before we get to the questions. I just want to remind everybody that as you're having discussions with anyone, you do not represent the board individually. You can speak to the discussions that the board has had, but please do not be framing yourself as representing the board. Just wanted to reiterate that since that is an important context for engagement outside of the board.
Thanks, Adam. Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Quick question. I'm hopeful the answer is yes to this question, but when we get this draft, will it be a complete 2024 IECC that looks like we get electronically with strikeout or just the individual portions of what's being deleted and added, especially with the electric ready and solar ready code getting inserted in some areas?
Tim, it will essentially look like an ordinance would, where it will say, if we're making amendments to a section, it'll say it's amended to read as such, or the amended to add language as such, or whatever. So The draft will identify that the IECC, the 2024 IECC, is the base of the code, and then the full code package is that base of the code plus our amendments to it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, go for it, Kim.
I just wanted to find out if you guys are planning to send out an email that then we can forward along to our contacts to let them know about the public comments and whatever information they should look at in advance or links to it. It'd be really helpful.
Yeah, so we will be sending out all of this information to the listserv, who has signed up for, updates on all of the energy code stuff, and we will make sure that the board is included on that email. So you're welcome to forward that along.
Great, thank you.
Tim, thanks, Adam. All right, well, if there are no other questions, I'll send you guys off. Happy holidays. I hope you find some rest and relaxation over the Christmas, New Year's timeframe, and look forward to catching up with you guys in the new year. Thanks for your time.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.